Order, order. This is a sitting of the DCMS Select Committee. It's another hearing on racism in cricket. Can I welcome the witnesses today? We've got George Doble, the Chief Correspondent of The Cricketer here, and we have Lord Kamlesh Patel, who is with us via Zoom, who is the Chair of Yorkshire County Cricket Club. So welcome to you both. You're missing the very cold weather here, Lord Patel. You're in the right place. Can I ask for any declarations of interests before we start?
I was invited and attended a game of the 100 at the Invitational Glamorgan County Cricket Club last summer.
Yes, I attended a game of the 100 as a guest of the England and Wales Cricket Board this year.
No one else? Lovely. Well, we shall start. Can I just start by asking Lord Patel particularly, it's over a year since we held our first hearing in this inquiry, and I wonder if you could just very briefly give us an overview of what's happened in that intervening period and where you think we are now, please.
Thank you, Chair, and forgive me if I start a coughing fit in the middle of this. I apologise in advance. Yeah, it's been a sobering year. It's made me think a lot about lots of things. If I just said in 2 minutes the context of me taking on this role on the 5th of November last year. There was a real sense of urgency and time. I think after taking on the role, and I did turn it down twice, I think, but felt that I did need to take the role on. I realised very quickly I had about 10 to 12 weeks to turn down the views of a significant number of stakeholders. Otherwise, the club would have been in serious. So, for example, the majority of our sponsors had left, and the few remaining were rapidly hemorrhaging. The ECB had suspended all major and international matches, which meant no income, which meant a very bleak future or any future for Yorkshire at the time. I think every politician, rightly so, was demanding questions to some very, very tough answers to some very tough questions, and wanted to see dramatic change before we were given cricket back. Every newspaper, again, rightly so, had us on the front pages for the wrong reasons. The Equality and Human Rights Commission, the regulator of equality and human rights law in our country, were reviewing the documentation and considering whether an unlawful act had taken place at the club. And I was faced with a very fractured staff team. I think some were bewildered, some were shocked, and some were in complete denial that racism or discrimination had taken place at the club. And there were a small group of previous leaders who believed nothing had ever happened under their watch and were determined to oppose any changes. So we had to put together a comprehensive, a reliable, a realistic plan that met the improvement targets that were set by the ECB for us, 10 initial criteria that moved to 13 later. And they covered issues like governance, finance, safeguarding, appointment of a new independent board, the production of a localised EDI plan, commissioning 2 reviews, one on governance and one on inclusivity. And we had about 8 weeks to make sure we delivered answers to some, strong questions and criteria to have the sanctions lifted. The ECB obviously were not the only regulator scrutinising us, as in December the Equality and Human Rights Commission announced, having reviewed the documentation, that they considered it likely that an unlawful act had taken place at Yorkshire County Cricket Club. However, and I sort of quote from memory, that given their confidence that the new management of the club was taking appropriate steps to deal with past failures, including the departure of the entire previous management team, they decided to monitor the club, but reserve the right to take action if all the plans that we said we were going to do had not been implemented. So we had a wholesale change. In the first couple of weeks, we set up, one of the first things I did was set up a telephone helpline. This was an independent helpline set up and managed completely by Littleton Chambers. Mo Sefi Casey, who was an expert in discrimination law and elite sport. And I can give you, more detail on that as we go along. We introduced new policies and procedures in terms of recruitment, and we use those policies and procedures and put a diverse interviewing panel together to employ a managing director of cricket, a whole new coaching squad, a whole new high performance team that looked after the young people on the county pathway, underpinned by an excellent medical team. And then we went on to recruit a brand new board, and that was a tough ask to be able to do that in 6 weeks. And I think the headhunters were saying to me, this is not going to be realistic to appoint 6 new people. I'm pleased to say, and maybe some of the actions we took and some of the journey we were going on, we had over 600 inquiries for those 6 posts with over 270 applications. So the appointment of 6 individuals who I firmly believe have got an extremely impressive skill mix and reflect the population we serve in terms of the communities we serve. We have appointed 8 independent members for the first time ever, 2 members from the membership. Out of those 10 people, 4 are women. We represent the majority of faiths, including Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Hinduism. We got a skill mix that was set for us by the Good Governance Institute. So we put those in place. 4 of those board members are going to be board champions. So, for example, Baroness Tanny Gray Thompson is leading the work around women and girls and disabled people. And then we have a board champion for our very large South Asian communities and a board champion for less well-off families. I think we've decided those 4 areas because it wasn't just about tackling racism. I think this was tackling a broader view. So we've developed an EDI plan with a slight difference. It's based on human rights, the human rights values of safety, of fairness, of equity, dignity and respect. And we've made those come alive. Amongst those 4, we introduced a zero tolerance policy across the piece, and that was reflected in all the matches that were played at not only at Headingley but at outgrounds at Scarborough and York. We introduced a respect campaign where people could report instances of discrimination using a text message. We had a police presence at matches. We had an increased steward presence and new training. We increased the volunteers that came there. We made a massive change, and I can talk about this later, in our pathways, how young people come into the system, how they play their games. We have opened not just the cricket ground, but our hospitality venues to the community in Yorkshire for the first time ever. So, we celebrate for the first time ever in 160 years. Eid, we celebrated Diwali, we raised money for the Pakistan floods victims, and we're just about in 3 days having a Christmas carol on the pitch. And these were represented by people of all faiths and no faiths. I think it was really important from across the piece. So the doors have opened up. As a result of some of those doors opening up and us showing this strong leadership, we've had the majority of sponsors return, but we've also had new sponsors come to Yorkshire, and some of the new sponsors have helped us with the Pathways programme for young children coming into the piece.
That's quite a wide-ranging update, Lord Patel. Thank you. Kevin Brennan.
Thank you and welcome to both our witnesses. Can I just ask you first, Lord Patel, have you got any regrets about the way you handled the removal of Kunwar Bansal and his colleagues?
Well, Cumwar Bansal was not employed by Yorkshire. He was employed by Physio Pavilion. That was a commercial contract that we ended, that we're still in litigation under. There was a difficult position where you have a young man who had been racistly bullied, and this was factually found by a couple of investigations.
Can
Probably,
I just say, Lord Patel, if it's still in the legal process, you shouldn't go into the detail of the case.
Yeah, so look, it is in the legal process. I wasn't intended to go into the case, but just to say it was a very difficult situation. But no, I don't regret having taken the actions.
Okay, Mr. Dobell, what do you make of the journalism of the Yorkshire Post all around this case? Do you think they've been fair in airing both sides of the debate, or would you have any criticisms?
Morning. May I answer the question that you put to Camlish first? Would that be okay? About
as long as we steer clear of legal proceedings.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. In terms of the people who were sacked or let go for writing the letter, I think it's really important that the context of that is understood. At the time that letter was written, we know that a young man, a young player, had been bullied to the point, racially bullied to the point where he almost committed suicide. It's not particularly disputed. We know that several players have admitted using racist language, and we know that the club have admitted not following their procedures and processes. So basically, we know that the club admits and individuals admit that he was racially bullied. That letter, by a group of people, stated, we won't accept any sanction or censure, okay? Any sanction or censure, and instead we should counterattack against the person who was bullied to the point of suicide. In that context, I find it incredible that anyone thinks they shouldn't have been sacked.
Okay. And on my question about the journalism of the Yorkshire Post, what would you say about that in relation to all of this?
It's been extremely disappointing. I mean, they have been the voice of the racist. They have provided the voice for the racist. They have intimidated and bullied Camlish. They've intimidated and bullied Azim. I mean, the fact of the matter is, when we talk about the progress made, Azim, his sister Amna, who also worked at the club, and his family have been forced to go and live abroad by intimidation and bullying. Does that sound like progress? And if you ask him, which I'm sure you will in an hour's time, he will tell you the number one reason was the Yorkshire Post. The Yorkshire Post had a campaign to discredit and intimidate. And the problem is that these words have consequences. So I had dinner with Azim last night, Azim and his 3 security guards. And why is that necessary? Because of the consequences of the words, most of the words that come from the Yorkshire Post. They've made no attempt to even try and understand. They've called Camlish immoral, among other things. Factually, they've been inaccurate. I could give you countless examples. But from the very start, look, it doesn't really matter what I think, because I'm on the other side of the argument, but Sporting Equals, the arm of Sport England, released a statement decrying them for victim blaming and institutional journalism. Kick It Out have given us a statement that talks about client journalism.
You said institutional journalism. Did you mean
institutional racism?
Right.
I'm sorry, I did.
But as a journalist, you're a very experienced journalist, obviously, and these are very strong words you're issuing about, fellow members of your trade. What do you think? Do you have any idea what their motivation might be to pursue this kind of campaign?
I fear that they think they're catering for their market, and I like to think they've got their market wrong. I think the people of Yorkshire are better than that. And to be fair, every time there's been a vote at Yorkshire, Camlish has carried the day quite comfortably, actually. So I think they've got it wrong. But look, on a basic level, I feel a little bit sorry for the individual cricket journalist. I just think I've been friends with him. He's actually been very good at his job for a long time. I think he's out of his depth.
For the record, what's his name?
What, do you want me to name him? That seems a bit unfair, but I'd be uncomfortable doing that because I think he's been fed information by people who are more cynical and are much closer involved and understand what's happening. So they have drip-fed him information, and he's regurgitated it into the paper. His editor has to take more responsibility. His editor is the one who's meant to say, well, what's going on here? But look, as I say, it's not just me. Sporting Equals, Kick It Out. DCMS, indeed, put out a statement about a year ago, didn't they, talking about the Yorkshire Post. So, you know, you've asked me my views and I've told you, but it isn't just me.
Can I ask you, Lord Patel, what's been the personal effect on you of the Yorkshire Post's journalism?
Very significant, because I think every time, you know, we're working extremely hard, and it's not just about me. I think the staff, and we're going somewhere, and then you get almost daily at times, if not weekly, an article that just saps everybody's energy and morale. And every time an article appears, something triggers in somebody somewhere. Look, the majority of Yorkshire people have been amazing. If I may, and I don't, if I read you a couple of letters, just to give you a sense of what it means.
If you could just briefly, just excerpts.
Just really quickly. Look, I mean, this letter was received not from a Yorkshire person, but a few days after I arrived. And it gives you a sense of the other side of the argument. Dear Chairman, whoever it is at the moment, I'm a Lancasterian and I'm not into cricket, but that's by the way. I've been reading in the press about all the ballyhoo of a P alleging whatever he did when he played for Yorkshire about 10 years ago. I think this county's gone crazy. I can't remember what I have said 10 years ago, but all this has been let loose about alleged remarks, etc., while playing with teammates. And now he's walked off with £200,000, not bad for a day's work. And all that must have to come from Yorkshire County Cricket Club. Then I think I read they're 50 million in debt. Now someone has put this guy, surname Patel, in charge to sort things out. Another coon, no offence, but it's in the Oxford Dictionary. Seems he's an Indian, and Indians and peas can't stand each other. So he'll be taking Yorkshire County Cricket Club to the cleaners, I believe. I like a whiskey after reading all this about remarks 10 years ago has made me take to the bottle. It's all so ridiculous, all out of proportion. If you can't call somebody who is a P, then what can you call them? And we've had dementia members saying... Is
that an example of the other correspondence you've received?
Yeah, I have a bag full of that stuff. But every time the Yorkshire Post put an article in, either social media would happen or letters like this would happen. People calling me public sector Jobsworth. I only got the job because I'm Asian. I'm immoral. Complaints about a whole host of stuff. Counter that with the thousands of Yorkshire people who have been supportive and come shut down. But it does impact. It does impact on you personally, and it impacts on your family, and it impacts on the people who work with me.
Okay, I just need to ask you one or two more questions. Are you still in contact with Colin Graves?
No. Look, I had a long-term relationship with Colin when I was on the ECB and worked very closely with him. I felt very saddened that throughout this process, I don't know if fallen out's the word or not, but I took a course of action, so he clearly didn't agree with me. We had a problem because I was clearly told that Colin could not be associated with the governance of this club by the ECB. That has, Colin heard different, applied to be a member of the board, was unsuccessful through the interview process. And unfortunately, a number of people, Robin Smith, Tony Vann, Martin Butterworth and others, Tim Emmett, have taken it upon themselves to wage a campaign of whether it's a PR or whether it's procedural roadblocks that have been incalculable costs.
Has any part of that campaign involved lobbying by MPs on behalf of Colin Graves?
I contacted all Yorkshire MPs because I felt it was my duty to do, and many got in touch with me. MPs outside of Yorkshire, a couple have been, I mean, Nigel Adams was in touch with me, but we never managed to meet. But I know he was a big supporter of Yorkshire, and I met him with Colin many years ago. But no,
Is there anyone specifically though who's been pressing Colin Graves' case that you're aware of?
Not with me, no.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
I've offered.
Thank you, Chair. Can I start with you, George? Just one of the things that's frequently been said to me by reporters, too frequently, in fact, is that a lot of the allegations that were made here in this committee were uncorroborative. So that they weren't corroborated and were not backed up by any other evidence other than Azim's personal statements. What's your reaction to that?
Well, it's factually inaccurate, but it is understandable. And actually, it's worth saying thank you to DCMS, because without this committee a year ago, when Azim got to speak and you got to speak to him, it had felt for a couple of years that we were just shouted into the wilderness. It didn't feel like the game was listening. Again, to put it in perspective, it's 63 months since Adil Rashid and Azim Rafiq first made their complaints of racism at Yorkshire. 63 months. And all that's happened is neither of them have played a first-class game for the county again. And we're still waiting for hearings. Now, there have been various reports. There have been lots of reports. There's been an employment tribunal at which racism was admitted by various people, including players at Yorkshire. There's been this Squire Patton Boggs report, which has only ever been leaked. I think you guys have it, but huge extracts of it haven't been seen. There's been various inquiries by other people. There are the hearings, and there are the ECB hearings, but because, for various reasons, they haven't actually happened. Probably because the CDC, the Cricket Disciplinary Commission, isn't fit for purpose. I think that's one of the things that most reasonable people will conclude after this process. As I say, it's been 63 months. But in terms of the specific allegations that Azim made, I mean, every one of them that has been investigated has been proven. I'm trying to think of...
Well, let me help you, because I've got a list here. Matthew Hoggart personally apologised. Corroboration of former players and coaches of how they were treated. There was the apology that came after the Patton Boggs report. There were witnesses that witnessed the comments that were made by Michael Vaughan. There was the person.
Well, I think it's worth saying there were 4 Asian players in that side. 3 of them have given statements to say they heard Michael Vaughan make those comments. I mean, it shouldn't be all about Michael Vaughan, to be fair.
No, definitely
and
not.
the fourth has now said that they actually heard someone say it, but they weren't sure. Well, they don't think it was Michael Vaughan. So all 4 heard the comment.
And then there's the apology from David Lloyd, and then there's one from Gary Balance, and then there's, of course, the UK Equality Watchdog that says Yorkshire racism was likely to have been unlawful. All of that independently verified on a wide range of allegations that Azim made here and in other places. Yet what we seem to be getting from a section of the media, and Yorkshire Post is foremost in that, is a constant refrain that actually it's just Azim on his own.
Well, that is absolutely right, that they try and suggest it was just Azim to minimise the extent of the problem. But I think this is what institutional racism looks like. It's when the systems of power stand shoulder to shoulder to prevent change, to prevent there being justice. And the systems of power include the media. Absolutely they do.
So in the cricket establishment, how do you think they've stood up over the last year?
They haven't. I mean, I am encouraged. Most of the time, I am quite encouraged. It feels like we made a bit of progress. I believe in Camlish. I believe in the new management of the ECB. I think they're a substantial upgrade. So there are good people and good things happening. But the fact is that one of the signatories of that letter that Camlish was talking about earlier is in the England dressing room now. Does that suggest that they've taken it seriously? Does that suggest the issue's taken seriously? And there's sort of a culture of secrecy, of not wanting to, of camaraderie, perhaps chumocracy, where well-known people aren't criticised by other well-known people because no one wants to dare rock the boat in the way that Azeem has. And look what's happened to Azeem. I mean, look what happens to whistleblowers in cricket. He's had to leave the country and he's got round-the-clock police protection. So I could sort of understand it, but, we haven't had 63 months in, we haven't had a hearing. So when people complain about trial by media, I think they kind of got a point. But without the media, and without DCMS, to be fair, nothing would have happened. If that Strath Patton Boggs report hadn't been leaked, everything would have gone back to normal at Yorkshire. Everything would have carried on as normal.
Thank you very much. Camlish, if I can ask you, you've come under a lot of personal attack in your role as the chair of the board at Yorkshire. Do you feel that you've had enough support from the cricketing establishment in what you're seeking to achieve?
It's a difficult question to answer. Look, on a personal level, there's been a couple of individuals, the likes of Martin Darlow, who was on the board, who challenged but then supported. There was an executive or two who were there to support me. But every time, I think as George has eloquently said, every time there's an issue, every time people needed to stand up and support you, they didn't. And that was sad because I was part of the ECB for 5.5 years. I was there working with these individuals. But, if I was attacked in the press or, if cricket leaders or previous cricket leaders had made unsubstantiated statements, nothing was done. And I asked in writing, and I have email after email, letter after letter saying, you asked me to do this, I've done this, please support me. And I've no response to any of those letters or emails. So it was very distressing. Like George, I'm looking forward to the new leadership. I'm hoping Richard Thompson, the few meetings I've had with him seem positive, and it feels like it's going forward. But up in this last 12 months, the answer has to be no. Do you think that? Do you think they get it? I mean, when you've read out examples of racial abuse that you get every time there's an article printed, do you think they really understand the pressure that you're under and the pushback that you're standing up to? I think there is this bit of a dichotomy. I think if I was an individual who wasn't a member of the House of Lords, who hadn't had any sort of leadership experience in cricket or, worked in lots of different areas, you'd just walk away. You would, I don't know where Azeem gets the strength to carry on. You would just run because people do not understand this. I think because of the position I have, they think, oh, well, he can handle it. And yeah, look, in the public eye, just like you, Clive, and everybody else, we get flack. That's what we expect to do. And I've worked in the prisons service, I've worked in the mental health sector, I've worked with drug users. So, you expect a certain amount of flack. This is relentless. And this is from an area where you don't expect it. This is sport, for God's sake. This is something we enjoy, we love. It brings people together. And, this group of individuals, this group who've just been, a very concerted attack, I do not think people do understand it. I don't think the ECB have got it. I think they're reacting to the headlines when it says, you haven't done enough for this area. Yes, we'll do something then. You haven't done enough with women and girls. Yes, we'll do something then. It's not a wholesale, systematic approach to say we've got to have a root and branch review. We've got to look at the whole culture of cricket and get under the skin and really have a look at this. my understanding is the IEC report has got, over 4,000 people have gone to it. That says something. That's just not Yorkshire. That's something sadly wrong if people have had to wait for an independent inquiry to come along and 4,000 people have had to come out to say something.
Do we have the right structure in running cricket? I mean, is it time for an independent regulator? It's been called for in football. Do we need something similar?
I've been the regulator of 2 government bodies. I was chair of 2 Mental Health Commission and Social Work England. I've been a member of 3 other regulators, so I understand regulation quite well. In an ideal world, an independent regulator would be excellent. I suppose if I'm realistic, the time it would take to put in primary legislation, to set up a system, we'd end up navel-gazing for years to come about an independent regulator. But should the CDC and the ECB change, absolutely. So having gone through this process, and I could talk for a long time on this, I think the regulatory approach that the ECB take with the CDC is completely flawed.
Thank you.
May I give you a quick example, if that's okay?
Yes, sir.
Of an investigation. Okay. So a year or so ago, well, 13 months ago, I did a piece with Maurice Chambers, who was a cricketer of African Caribbean origin, black cricketer, played with Essex and Northants, among others. And he had examples of racism at both clubs. Now, Essex put together an inquiry, which is still ongoing, but they've done the right thing. He messaged me on the anniversary of the piece and said, well, if I may, it's going to only take 30 seconds or so. I haven't heard anything from them. I'm starting to think they're trying to brush it under the rug. I haven't heard anything from Northants at all. Okay, so I texted. I forwarded the messages to the chair of Northants, and I said, morning, I received this from Maurice Chambers this morning. Surely Northants have tried to investigate and speak to him. They replied, hi, George. Yes, my CEO messaged Maurice very soon after the article. Winter well. I replied, Maurice says he didn't. He says he's had no contact and there's been no investigation. He replies, I checked with Ray this morning and he has the WhatsApp message on his telephone, so not sure why it wasn't received. However, if he wants Ray to speak, contact him again. Very happy to do so. I reply, forgive me for saying that one WhatsApp message which hasn't been answered doesn't sound like an especially concerted effort to clean up racism, does it? I then passed on his email address. The point being, Maurice, by the way, is another person who's moved abroad because he didn't think there was opportunity here and he's traumatised by what he's been through. Another person forced out of the country, basically. And Azim came to this country, Azim and his family came to the country as refugees. It is shameful that they've been spat out again in the way that's happened. But that is an investigation from Northants County Cricket Club. And meanwhile, the player who he alleges used the N-word to him has been given a long-term, very lucrative contract. The game isn't serious. And the only thing that will make them change is media pressure and you people. They've had their opportunity. 63 months.
Thank you, Chair.
John Nicholson.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for coming in. Can I start with you, Mr. Dobell? The ECB has set up a whistleblower helpline. I'm very keen on whistleblowers as a journalist in my previous profession, and I think we often get good information sent to us here directly as members, knowing that we will always keep people's confidences when they write to us. But what do you think the ECB has done with any information that they've been given? And to what extent do you think that they can protect those who in good faith try to whistleblow in order to expose some of the dreadful stuff that we've seen?
I think that's a brilliantly pertinent question. I think it's really interesting that all these hotlines have been set up, but yet no one can provide one example of an individual that's been brought to justice through any of these hotlines. The only cases that are ever going to be heard are the ones that have been brought to attention by the media. Now, why is that? So, I'll hypothesise an answer. You know, a lot of people, a lot of players, coaches, umpires, administrative staff have phoned me in the last couple of years over these issues. I mean, a lot of people. So very few of them have wanted to go public. Partly they saw what happened to Azim in particular, where there's a concerted attempt to discredit, just make up stories about him. I mean, I'm not going to pretend that he, like any of us, is perfect, but most of the stories that are in the media at the moment are just lies, and will demonstrably be proved to be so.
Can you give me an example?
Well, yeah, I can actually. There was a story, it's maybe not the most serious, but it was one of the most absurd, that he supposedly had taken money from Sport England and hadn't paid it back and hadn't run the project. Now, Sport England produced, and I got told this fairly early on and I investigated it, Sport England produced a statement that said, this is nonsense. There was going to be a scheme. It didn't run, so he refunded the money. We've got no problem.
Of course, that's a libel. And often people will write to you on Twitter and elsewhere and say, why don't you sue? I get that quite a lot. And of course, the answer is you need a lot of money to sue. And none of us, I think, around this table, none of you guys sitting there watching today, have the kind of money necessary to sue for libel.
I think, well, I don't know about that, but it's more... It's
enormously expensive.
Of course it is, and a waste of time and energy, which I think is part of the thing. They try and drain you. And you know, Camlish is enormously drained. He's done fantastic work, but it's taken a lot out of him. He's told you about his experience in prisons and mental health and stuff, and yet he's finding this the most difficult thing he's done. It's a cricket club. It shouldn't be that way. But some of these things are written quite intelligently, such as that Sport England thing. 30 paragraphs of what a disgrace this guy is. He's taken this money, he hasn't set up the scheme, and then you get the statement at the end. Yep. So if you bother to read the 32 paragraphs, you'll find out that actually this isn't a story at all, but the headline's pretty bad. So it's more cynical and, I think, orchestrated than that. Go back to the whistleblowing thing. Look, the counties asked players to come and talk to them. And sometimes they did the right thing. Sometimes they said, look, we're really sorry. We want to make things right. Let's get you involved in the pathways, the coaching, or let's even pay you off. That's happened on a few occasions, and that's fine. My worry is that they're actually just doing it to keep it in-house, to stop people going to the media so much. Yep. And actually, one of the great things that Camlish did was, Azim had been offered a payoff before, but it was always contingent upon a non-disclosure agreement. Yes. Well, we need to talk about it.
Okay. Now, you mentioned, and it was really shocking, that when you had dinner with Azim last night, he had three bodyguards to protect him. What a way to live. You also highlighted the explosive testimony that we got just a year ago. Has anybody been held to account, anybody at all, since that testimony?
Not really. I mean, there's the court of social justice, if you like, but no. The cricket disciplinary proceedings sort of drag on, but I would be reasonably confident that they're trying to make it so unpleasant and difficult for Azim that he quits, and they can say, oh no, it's you know.
Well, we're doing our very best in this committee to make sure that that doesn't happen. Now let's look at the collapse in representation that we've seen. Only 1% of professional cricketers now are of Afro-Caribbean heritage. In the 1990s, a third of the English team were. Only 30% of those playing sport in professionally cricket are Asian now. 30% of those playing cricket are Asian, but only 3% make it into the leagues itself. You'd have hoped that one result of this enormous controversy would be that it would have encouraged and allowed those from BAME communities to enter the sport, because the people responsible for the sport would have been doing everything possible to try and address some of the damage by encouraging them in. In fact, the opposite has happened.
You would think so, wouldn't you? I mean, again, the question's very pertinent. So there are one of the reasons that I'm actually quite optimistic, I probably don't sound it, but I am, is that the solutions are at hand. The solutions are at hand. So there's a scheme called the South Asian Cricket Academy, which has been funded mainly by Birmingham City University. And it's cost £55,000 to run through this year, and it's taken people who have sort of missed out on professional contracts, given them specific training. And I think 5 of them, 3 players and 2 coaches, have now moved back into the professional game on full-time professional contracts. And it's sort of shown what could be done. Now, as I say, it's cost £55,000, nothing to do with the ECB. That's £5,000 less pounds than Tom Harrison paid consultants before coming to speak to you, isn't it, to have advice. And all he did was sit in front of you and sweat. So they could have the solutions. What time is it? They could have it by noon. For £60,000, they could have this scheme and they could improve the representation of Asian players in county cricket within weeks. Yeah, there's not really the will. Why isn't there? Well, I think probably because there are individuals at the ECB who think that it would affect their position, and there hasn't been the power to say that doesn't matter, there are more important things at hand. There's another example. When cricket had issues with match fixing and doping, entirely new code of conducts were written, which was sensible, because people were able to get out of things on loopholes, say, I didn't understand, I wasn't allowed to do this. So the game has to write a code of conduct for cricket and for inclusion and discrimination in particular. So it's done that. A firm of lawyers, Mayer Brown, did it pro bono and provided it to the PCA, the union. Okay? So the game hasn't even had to pay for it. And the ECB are reluctant to adopt it. Why? Because they want it to be nebulous. They want it to be stretchy. They don't want to be compelled to act.
Okay, thank you. Lord Patel, finally, can I ask you this same question? And just to repeat the figures so that everybody has them, only 1% of professional cricketers now are of Afro-Caribbean heritage. In the 1990s, a third were. 30% of those playing cricket at the moment in England are of Asian extraction, and yet only 3% make it into the professional leagues. Why have the cricketing authorities failed so dismally to try and address the problem of racism in cricket? Because you'd have thought, after the enormous controversy, that they would have done everything possible to stretch out to minority communities and to make sure that they get better representation.
Look, really important question. In the public sector, we are faced with usually trying to attract black or Asian people through the service, through the doors. Cricket has never had that problem. Like you said, 35% of all recreational players in cricket are of South Asian descent. They're knocking down the doors, but they come to the shop window, some look inside, some pop in, walk around and can't buy anything because it's not for them, and some just leave and never come back. We tried, we've done lots of things, lots of initiatives, but nothing systematic. If I give you an example of how it's changed fundamentally at Yorkshire in terms of the pathways, so 2% of people coming through the system in the county age groups were from South Asian backgrounds or diverse backgrounds. We've taken away all costs. This is not just about South Asian communities, it's about those who are less well off and can't afford it. We've provided free coaching. We've stopped private one-to-one coaching with coaches. We've introduced a non-biased assessment process. We've opened the observations for anybody to come.
Sorry, could you just summarise, if you don't mind, just summarise for people who don't follow cricket closely before I hand back to the chair, why is it not working? Why is the representation of minority people so scandalously scant in the professional game?
But I think at Yorkshire it is working. So we've gone from 2% to a third of the young people in the system now in 6 months. We've managed to make it work, but there was a will to do it, and it's expensive. Okay. So, that's going to cost us near on £500,000 to ensure those children have access to free coaching and kit.
Thank you, Lord Patel. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Rupert Hook.
Thanks, Chair. And thank you both. We're lucky to have you two, the good guys kind of thing. In a way, we know that you get the argument and you're on side. I was not on the committee last year when the original testimony came out, but there was a sense that I mean, at the highest level, all sorts of people, Sajid Javid said heads should roll. You know, if the ECB doesn't fix, it's not fit for purpose. It feels, I think everyone is saying the same thing, that it's been disappointingly slow progress. Apart from Lord Patel's appointment, not a lot seems to have changed. I mean, do you think that the lack of ethnic diversity amongst chairs and chief executives leads to these problems, that things flow from there?
To
both of you.
Well, sure. I mean, to go back to the previous question, there's a line in The Simpsons that I think applies to cricket. Above the snooty shopping centre in Springfield, it says, "Our prices discriminate because we can't." That's what cricket does. Cricket forces people out. I mean, a lot of this is about class and finance as much as it is about colour. And if you did a Venn diagram, there'd be an awful lot of crossover there. And I'm probably not qualified to tell you which is which and where it distinguishes. But look, it's not just at chief executive. I mean, I think there are, if we look at the first-class counties in the MCC, there are 19 chief executives. 18 are men, one's a woman, all of them are white. The problem is, beyond that, though, it goes so much further in the game. You know, there isn't enough leadership of people of colour at coaching level either. Now, there's been a bit of recognition that this has to change, but it's very slow. And what that's meant is that people who have struggled previously or might have felt that they were not understood or even been discriminated against in more obvious ways haven't necessarily felt there was anyone they could go to or would understand. So, yeah, there has to be... You see, we're always tinkering around the edges. We're always talking about schemes, and there's got to be a cultural change. And at this stage, I think anyone who doesn't realise the extent of the problem is part of the problem.
Yeah, Lord Patel, would you agree with that? There is a class issue, that it's seen as a thing of village greens and elitists. It's not the people's game in the way that football... You know, you can't imagine taking the knee in cricket, can you?
No, I mean, there's a real class issue. So this is not just about Asian communities or African Caribbean communities. It's a real class issue. We've proved if you can remove some of those barriers that it does work. Leadership is important. You know, we can't get away from the fact that you need to have good leadership and strong leadership. But my anxiety about saying, well, you know, Yorkshire got an Asian chair, so it's okay, that doesn't work. You know, or we employ 2 or 3 people. They become the sort of identified people who have to do. This is not about that. This is about a full cultural shift, an acknowledgement that even, you know, somebody with the backing I have, it's hard work. This is not something, you know, just because I'm black, it'll sort things out. Ironically, you know, our biggest success, going back to the last question about the pathways, that's our biggest success in seeing young children of all backgrounds coming through the system, was led by my deputy chair, who was a white guy. And because of his skill set, he's strategic, he thinks, he coaches, he supports the staff, and he's driven this thing. And it's had the biggest impact on inequality in Yorkshire cricket. So I think it's about the full skill set. It's about, you know, looking under the skin in terms of culture. It's about, you know, a whole system approach, not just tinkering at the edges. You know, we've had more children from, you know, state schools coming through now, not private schools anymore. You know, so I think it's that whole piece. We had an Asian woman who was a chair at Leicester. She didn't survive. I mean, I think we have to understand, and the governing body has to understand, if you want to bring people in, you have to support them, and more than just kind words. You have to be there when, you know, wholesale, when you're attacked wholesale in terms of stopping dramatic change. And we've had massive upheaval at Yorkshire. We've had to change it. We've blown things up and reset it again. That's not what's going to happen. It's going to be a gradual change in other places. But that's come at a cost.
Oh, sorry. That a lot of this stuff seems to be done in-house, the ECB stuff. I mean, there's no equivalent, I don't think, of kick it out. There was something which is very, very well established and well known. I think there was something called Not Racism for Six. I don't know, George, if you know if that still exists. Tony Banks apparently set it up in the 90s.
Kick It Out exists in cricket. I'm actually on the advisory board, but it's just started. I mean, they've given us a statement today, or maybe it was yesterday, which is largely about media coverage in the Yorkshire Post. So they're actually doing some academic work, I suppose it is, on the correlation between negative news articles and attacks, either online or physical. Because, you know, we talk about the social media attacks. I mean, Azim's had people outside his house. He's had people outside his parents' house. You know, it's much more physical and direct. And they've been very helpful in hopefully be able to give you a report in due course about the correlation between negative media coverage and specific attacks, because, as I say, words have consequences. But yeah, Kick It Out are involved in the sport and very welcome too.
Okay, that's good news then. I mean, there's a Duncan Stone who's written a book called Different Class, about these class issues that you raised yourself. And he sort of says that it's a game stuck in the 19th century. I think it's promising what Lord Patel has said about these changes afoot. But, I mean, how do we reset the culture? There's a quote I've got here also from Stephen Fry from the MCC. They were trying to do away with the traditional Eton Harrow game, but then it got reinstated at the last minute. He says that, don't you want to lose that image that cricket sometimes still has, a turgid image of snobbery and elitism? How do we get away from that when change just seems really, really slow?
Well, Duncan's book's very good, but there are lots of decisions that the game has made which were basically all pragmatic and financial and short term. For example, just going behind a paywall for broadcast rights prevented a lot of people falling in love with the game. Presumably it would hit people of lower socioeconomic incomes worse, because they might be able to afford subscription TV less readily. But, you know, a lot of decisions, going back to selling off the school playing fields, would have affected people, again, of lower socioeconomic status greater, because they wouldn't be able to compensate in the same way. So, you know, Duncan's book is a very good resource for people to learn about these things. And, you know, we should say again and again that the link between those race problems and class problems is very, very close. I think, by the way, one great stat, that Cowlish has just said, 2% at Yorkshire, 2% of the pathway with ethnic minorities. That is, bearing in mind that over 30% of the recreational game is played just by Asian people, that is stunning. And by the way, it was a period that is referred to by the Yorkshire Post as all was harmony, because they didn't actually want non-white people coming in and changing things. They don't. They don't want to stop having meetings in the pub. They don't want to stop the banter. They don't want to change. So our game has to be more welcoming, and the first step of that is realising the extent of the problem. I think Cowlish's decision to do away with the cost of coaching and kit is absolutely vital and should be the template by which other clubs should follow. None have yet, although some are going along the way. For example, if you're a talented kid playing cricket and you're invited to coaching, you could be 10 years old, and they say, brilliant, you're in the county pathway, exciting. We're going to need £250 for kit and £250 for coaching. Well, straight away, you're limiting your opportunities. And that has happened at most clubs for quite a long time.
Yeah, Lord Patel.
Yeah. That's exactly what's happened.
Yeah.
I mean, that cost. And, one has to look at this. Interestingly, we've made a big decision, and some people would say, what a silly decision. You're financially in trouble and you're taking away £450,000 out of the club's kitty to actually enable these young children to play. I think it's the best decision we ever made. We made the decision first, we've seen the changes, and now we've got the first ever major Muslim sponsor who's come in and sponsored a large chunk of that, and an Indian sponsor who's sponsored a large chunk of it. So actually, it's brought in new partners who said, actually, you are doing what you say you're going to do. If people had confidence that the governing body or the first-class counties would genuinely open the doors and work with them, I don't think there's a shortage of people who will come and partner and work with us. And We've seen it at Yorkshire. We've lost every sponsor. We now have more sponsors than we've ever had in the history of Yorkshire. And new sponsors. That says something. That says people see there's a purpose, see there's a journey to go on, and want to affect change, want to be a part of that change. But there's a small group of people who don't want that to happen.
There's economic barriers, but there's also attitudinal barriers. Because again, this Duncan Stone book talks about from the 90s. He calls it, one of his interviewees talked about informal apartheid in the social scene afterwards. The pressure, the stuff Azim was talking about, pressure to have a drink, the social rituals that go with it. Is cricket's entire culture toxic?
Oh, toxic's a strong word because, interesting, I'd have to think about that. So it's the honest answer. The research by the guy who set up the South Asian Cricket Academy, because he did a PhD and then tried to find solutions for the problems he found. So his name's Tom Brown. He found that you were 13 times more likely to become a professional cricketer if you were privately educated rather than state educated. But if you are a professional cricketer, if you go to a public school and you're white, you're 34 times more likely to become a professional cricketer compared to being British South Asian and state educated. And those statistics, I think, were from 4,000 people in the ECB pathways. So it's a pretty good amount of data. So yeah, I mean, the game, yes, probably you're right, it is toxic and there has been a system of apartheid. It hasn't particularly been intentional. It's been short-sighted and economic-led over with short-term, short-sighted, as I say, but it's been allowed to be established, and at this stage we all know it's happening, and we've got to do something about it, and the game's been, as you say, terribly slow to act, and no one's been held account.
Yeah, it does feel it's been in denial. Is it toxic, or is it a meritocracy and open?
We also have to remember that it's the game that, I've enjoyed it since I was a little boy, that's made so many people understand each other better. It has the power to do that. This is the one sport that will bring very, very different communities, ages, and men and women together in playing it. My big worry and concern, and I think you are really hitting the nail on the head, is the recreational game is something we haven't looked at. And if I had a worry, if I thought there was a ticking time bomb anywhere, it's the recreational game. I get calls every week from people who are playing in the recreational game. Most of it's good news, it's great. Racism, discrimination, misogyny, weekly. We have to spend some time, effort and energy and money in this huge space where we can actually make some really good advances.
Thanks.
Can I just ask before I bring in Damien Green, Mr. Doble, the stats you quoted there, was there any backup on that as to how many state schools actually taught cricket at school compared to privately funded public schools?
Well, I don't have them, I'm afraid, but it's obviously very few. I mean, there's very, very little access to cricket in state schools, sadly, and when there is, it's often very reliant on the goodwill of inspirational teachers.
Thank you. Damien.
Thank you, Chair. Apart from being shocking, what we've been hearing this morning, I also find it extraordinary as a lifelong cricket lover. I don't understand how you can be a cricket-loving racist. I grew up watching Viv Richards and Michael Holding and Kapil Dev and Sunil Gavaskar and Imran Khan and so on. And I've just never understood it. And in that context, what you say that Mr. Doble, the Yorkshire Post is doing seems very extraordinary. I mean, most newspapers argue fiercely that they know their market, they know their readers. So it seems to me pretty unlikely that they would adopt what appears to be a very, very outre position if their readers, or at least a significant chunk of their readers, didn't agree with it. Isn't that's the way newspapers operate?
The logic and what you're saying is absolutely sound. To go back to the first bit, I agree with you about. I've thought the same thing too, but you know, that I didn't understand. You know, I grew up watching Somerset. Joel and Viv are my heroes, yeah? So, but a couple of years ago, during this whole process, I got a call from either John Holt or Ishmael Daywood. They were the two umpires of colour who took the ECB, tried to take the ECB to task. And they pointed out to me that there had been no people of colour appointed to the first-class list, that's basically professional umpires, since 1992. And I hadn't noticed. And that's my fault, isn't it? And part of the reason for that, and I'm really embarrassed that I didn't notice, part of the reason for that is that I guess I'm in a press box with lots of people who look like me and have had my experiences. And so, you know, a lot of discrimination won't start out as conscious, but that's why we need to have more diversity right across the board, including in the media. Right, to go to the specific point. As I say, the Yorkshire Post cricket writer has been drip-fed information that's incorrect. I'll give you a very good example, I think. He keeps saying that the Squire Patton Boggs report concluded that Azim wasn't telling the truth about the use of the word Kevin, which was used as a slur for anyone of colour, because at the time Gary Ballance denied saying it. He admitted using the P word, but he had denied saying that, and they said, well, why would he do that? Well, Gary has now admitted it. He admitted it in the Employment Tribunal, and I believe he's admitted it in the ECB hearings. So he was lying, and Azim wasn't. And that is one of the basic tenets of what the Yorkshire Post have been saying, that the tribunal, which was a sham of the Squire Patton Boggs report, which is a nonsense report, it's a shoddy piece of work, had decided that Azim wasn't telling the truth over that. Well, you know, actually he was, and it's now established. So some of what they've concluded is just factually wrong, but also I think, you know, they had their sources, and their sources are the people who have been kicked out of Yorkshire Cricket Club because they've been found to be at least responsible in one way or another for the culture that's there. And this is the thing, that people aren't accepting that the culture needed to change. You know, Camlish may remember, see, I got on quite well with Roger Hutton, his predecessor as chair. I thought he was in an impossible position, and he was a good man in a very difficult position, is my view. And he made mistakes. And I remember he said, you know, I think I can take these people on a journey. And Camlish said in his first press conference, I'm pretty sure I can take these people on a journey. And I made a point of saying to him afterwards, that's what Roger said, and they got him in the end. And I think we've got to think of it as, you know, racism's a cancer. You don't negotiate with cancer. You don't take it on a journey. You cut it out. That's the only way we're going to do it. So yeah, I stand by my views on the Yorkshire Post. I think they've been the voice of the racist. I'm not sorry that I've said strong things there about them. I think the editor's an utter disgrace. And I want them to reflect on the fact that they have forced a young man, a whistleblower, out of the country, and his family. They've forced them out of the country. Shameful.
Lord Patel, do you agree with that analysis that you can't take the Yorkshire cricket establishment, or indeed maybe the wider cricket establishment, on a journey? You've just got to take them on.
I've had this discussion with George. I've spent all my life trying to take people on a journey. At heart, I'm a social worker, so I have to believe people can change. Or the fundamental tenet is there's going to be an ability to change. I've agreed more and more with George as time has gone on. There's some people who just completely, utterly deny that anything is wrong and racism exists or discrimination exists. And yeah, you know, Yorkshire's just begun the journey. We're on a long journey. A lot of people are going to have to get off the bus on the way. There's no question about it, because it's a network. You start at 8 or 9 years old and you stay till you're 70 or 80, and you live in that family. You become a player, you become a coach, you become a head coach, you become a commentator, you know, and it's just the way things are. The way things are need to change. I don't know how conscious it is, but just, and I don't know if this is relevant, the first time I became a member of the ECB board, okay, I was the first Asian, but it didn't matter. I got appointed because I knew about regulation, I knew about governance. The first question I was asked on Sky TV was, oh, Lord Patel, you passed the Tebbit test. Why would you ask me if I passed the Tebbit test? I actually said, no, I don't. Because if we had a tournament tomorrow, I wouldn't support England or India. I'd support the West Indies, because I grew up in an era of these 12 men, giving all black people a hope in the country. But why would you ask that? It wasn't meant in a nasty way, but it's just that,
Yeah. Of the various things you said, two things shocked me. One was the letter you read out, Lord Patel, which was obviously just disgusting. But the second was that I think you said that one of the 16 people at Yorkshire sacked is now in the England dressing room.
I said that, yeah. That's right.
Who's that?
Well, again, should I name him? I mean, it seems... I'm told that the individual... I mean, Azim likes the guy. I'm told he's very good at his job and all the rest of it. I've never wanted to make it about individuals, but the fact is that one of the signatories of that letter, which I consider racist bullying, I really do, for the reasons I explained, yes, he's been employed straight away, and he's in the England dressing room. Is that a backroom staff?
Yeah, sure, but I mean...
But what does that tell you about the game? How it suggests to me that they say, oh, he's a good fellow, he didn't mean it, he's one of us, he's all right. There's no responsibility, and no repercussions.
I mean, I'm surprised as a journalist you don't want to name him. I get the point.
Well, shall I tell you? I'll tell you something interesting on that. So I got the Squire Patter Boggs report. I don't think anyone else had it, and a story leapt out. In fact, I wrote it. I just never published it. And the reason that is that in this incredibly biased, shoddy piece of work, they had still managed to uphold the complaints against Michael Vaughan, as it happens. So I wrote this story, and I thought, if I go with this story, all that will happen is Michael Vaughan will be vilified. That's all that will happen, really. Actually, the other story, the better story in the end, I think, was the story where someone admitted to having used the P word often, and he had been exonerated because they said it was banter. Exonerated is probably too strong a word, but he hadn't been, the complaint against him hadn't been upheld because they said it was banter and akin to using Zimbo from Zimbabwe, which they accused him of, Azim of using, which, by the way, is made up, which Gary would now tell you. Made up, just nonsense. So I actually wrote that as a story because I thought then the focus would be on the institution that decided that using the P word was banter. So I've never wanted to make it about individuals. I think it's really unhelpful to make it about individuals. It's about the whole system being rotten, to be honest.
But if you sack 16 people, it's about those 16 individuals. I mean,
no, I think it was about trying to change the culture of the club, and they wouldn't go. They just would not accept that there was a problem. As I say, they said they wouldn't accept, in their own letter, any censure. That's their expression, against any member of staff. Well, if you've got a culture of racist bullying, someone's going to have their hand smacked. And they weren't accepting that. So Camlish had weeks in which to save that club. They had lost their international status. They had lost all their sponsors. And they're about to go into receivership. And if they've gone into receivership, guess who would have taken ownership? Colin Graves, because he's the chief creditor. So he had to act very quickly. He had to change the culture of the club. These people made it pretty clear they didn't think there was a problem and didn't want to change and instead wanted to counterattack. So he made the decision he did. I don't think that's about individuals now. I think it's about changing the culture of the wider club.
Lord Patel, finally, do you have any optimism about cricket more widely, and not Yorkshire specifically? Do you feel things are now moving in what you would regard as the right direction?
The optimism I have is probably laid in the Independent Equity Commission report. I'm hopeful that report will identify some of these solutions. I'm hopeful that report will tell us how to do systematic change across the piece. I'm hopeful that Yorkshire provides a bit of a template about how others can do it. And I'm hopeful because the ECB has new leadership who've very clearly said what they want to do and how the direction of travel. I think it's going to be a really long journey because, hope doesn't carry it all the time. I think some really tough decisions have to be made. Just to go back to, Yorkshire was never about me. It's become about me. It wasn't about Patel. It was a club that needed structural change, needed good governance. It needed, simple things like appraisals and reviews and just good practice. And things that were wrong, you'd change them if they were wrong. people have made it about individuals. It just happens I'm not white, so it sort of almost put a spotlight on it.
Thank you, Chair.
Giles Watling.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just a quick one, because I'm going to ask this question again later, and I think you more or less covered it, George, just now. And by the way, George and Cameron, thank you so much for your very compelling and fluent evidence today. It's really important. But you touched on twice, you've now mentioned, you said at one point they don't want to stop the banter. Sorry, this is to George initially. In my experience, in actors' dressing room or rehearsal room or changing room in sport, there's always banter. The important question is when does banter become racism? I think you touched on it just now, but you don't want to take the banter out. You want to take the racist aspect. Is that not the case?
That is fair, and I accept that there's a cultural change in things that were said years ago or that we thought were acceptable. They probably weren't actually, but we probably thought they were, and they aren't now. Anything that is excluding, anything that is making someone in a minority of one or two in the team feel as if they're in a minority of one or two in the team is really unhelpful, yeah. And that's why this code of conduct would be so useful, because then it would allow the PCA to do the union to conduct training as they do for other things at the start of the year, and young players would understand what they could and couldn't do. They would have much more specific opportunity to learn. But yeah, the key thing is not to make people feel excluded. Yeah.
Okay, I tell you that. Camlish, have you got any comment on that?
Yeah. Well, just to say, I completely agree. All the young people who are coming into the pathway now are getting training more than just cricket. We're making them into good human beings with values. We're giving them training on life skills. Women have just been sort of forgotten in the place. The fact that our women's team won the final, yet they don't have their own changing room. That's going to change. They don't have their own space. That's going to change. It's just been something that you do. Now, we wouldn't use the N word or the P word now, all over the place. But so there's a distinction between banter on one end and systematic, attacking somebody.
Right, I take that on board. But so there is a sort of journey, but with a happy ending. Thank you, Chair.
That concludes the questions for this session. So can I thank both Lord Patel and George Dobell for giving evidence today to the committee and coming along. And we will have a brief, short break for 5 minutes while we change over panels. Thank you very much. Order.
The proceeding is currently suspended. 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 The proceeding is currently suspended.
Order. Can I welcome both of you here today, Azim Rafiq and Jahid Ahmed, both former cricketers. Welcome back, Azim. I'm going to start off with a very similar question to I opened up with the last panel to say it's now more than a year since you first came to see us. A lot has happened in that time. Could you very briefly just give us an overview of what's happened and where you think we are now?
Yeah, I mean, driving down yesterday, I feel a sense of sadness that I'm having to do this again. You know, the last year has been pretty challenging at times. It's been up and down, and, you know, there's been a lot that the impact has been quite great on me and my family. Firstly, I want to take the opportunity to thank all the people that have got in touch to support me. You know, people have got in touch, as you'll see in the document that I've handed in, to corroborate a lot of what I've said. People have got in touch to apologise, and that on a human level has meant the world to me. I've also had a platform and an opportunity to speak and hopefully help these things being eradicated and hopefully make better throughout society. I think the downside and the difficult bits that have been that my family has been the target of abuse, threats and attacks. You know, recently my family house, there's a bloke in broad daylight who basically walked in and out of the garden on the phone before defecating, bringing a loo roll, and it looked all very planned. We had another incident where a gentleman late at night was circling with what looked like a chain in his hand. And really, if I was looked at 13 months on from me opening my heart out, all that's changed is really that me and my family has been driven out of the country. And that's the sad element of it.
Thank you. Damien Green.
Thank you, Chair. You make an interesting point that you've had a lot of messages of support. Have any of them come from unexpected people, from people high up in cricket, people in the ECB? Have any of them reached out to you?
Look, obviously, there was some statements made of apology throughout the game, really. I was invited to meet the ECB board, which I did. and which, like I said, it was really on a human level, meant the world to me. But I spoke, although everyone's made this about me, it's not about me. I spoke out to make cricket a better place so my kids could go and play. And 13 months on, sadly, I mean, I would have loved to, well, not come here in the first place, but I would have loved to have come and told you how great things have been, how much cricket has changed. But unfortunately, what feels like is cricket is very much in denial. And my experiences have been vindicated, corroborated, time and time again through various different organisations, as it's in that document. Yet I sit here 13 months on, 2.5 years on from when I first spoke out, and there's still a group of people out there that actually feel like cricket's the victim in this.
And do you feel that this will carry on? I mean, do you, it's almost the last question I asked Lord Patel. Do you have any kind of optimism?
Well, we live in hope. I always want to see glass half full. The difficult thing for me is what I see is, you do the same things, you get the same results. There was an action plan in 1999. There was an action plan last year. The same PR initiatives are being rolled out. The same community faith organisations being activated. But actually, it all feels very superficial at the top. The recreational game hasn't even been looked at. And, the protection or the lack of protection for whistleblowers. One of the things why I spoke out was so other people didn't suffer in silence. And we're going to hear from Jahid here, Jahid and a lot of others that have felt empowered. But, the way I've been attacked and abused, why would you? Why would you speak out? I've got little hope in the new leadership, but it's very little at the minute.
Can I ask you the same question, Jahid? I mean, do you feel that anything has moved? I mean, you've obviously added your voice to the complaints.
I don't think it has much been changed, to be honest, because I've been very frustrated for over a year now, since I've spoken out. So far, I've received no support whatsoever from anyone, really, from your ECBs to your PCAs to Essex even. And I just this stuff, I'm a victim. I just don't feel like I'll get any support from anyone at the moment. And it just shows that whether they care, I don't know, because it seems like I haven't received much support from it.
Okay, I know others are going to ask detailed questions about the Essex case, so I'll hand back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Giles Watling.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you both for coming in today and sort of reliving some of the horrors that you've been through. And I'm really sorry you have to do that, but let's see if we can get some good out of this. First of all, I'd like to, as in your the attacks that we've heard you've had from the Yorkshire Post, how do you feel about that? Have you responded to that, and have they been in touch with you?
Well, where do I start? I think pretty early on, Yorkshire Post, through their correspondent, took a position. I actually have some sense of sympathy. He's known these people for well over 2 decades, and he's been fed lies, and he's believed them. It's been difficult. It's been really challenging. For example, they keep reporting snippets out of the Squire Patton Boggs report, but they fail to report the central conclusion that I was a victim of racial harassment and bullying. There's been match reports written on the Yorkshire Championship game with digs at me. And I think the wider impact of that, like I think George said it as well, for me, the editorial control and the senior editors and the leaders at the Yorkshire Post have a lot to answer for. And the impact locally has been quite big. Every time there's an article, it's created a wave of online abuse. It's created, like I said, there's some of the things I talked about earlier, but I got shouted at through the shop window. It's been so sad that a place I've called home for 21 years, and at times I've walked down the street fearing for my life. It's just been, and the effect is quite big. having to leave the country, it's not an easy decision.
But the Post has never made any moves towards you, offered you a platform to respond.
Look, I mean, we've had to get in touch with them sort of a couple of months ago because I think when we went through the articles, best part of over 2 years, 300 articles, with a lot basically attacking me at all opportunities. I don't feel like at any point they've had any balance, and it's been disappointing. And like I said, the impact of that, I spoke out. I knew that I would be targeted, but the way that's impacted me and my family especially, is something that Yorkshire Post should be held responsible for.
Right. We heard earlier from Lord Patel about some of the reforms and many wide-ranging reforms indeed that have been made. Are you satisfied with what's happening, or are you satisfied with the direction of travel?
Well, I mean, at Yorkshire, the thing I came here last year, I talked about accepting, apologising and showing a real will to do things in a different manner. And I've seen that through Lord Patel and the new leadership at Yorkshire. Are they perfect? No. Have they made mistakes? Absolutely. But they are actually trying. You can genuinely see that they're trying to make sure that no other kid is called a packie within the Yorkshire dressing room. And that's all we ask for. We're not asking for anything other than equal fairness. I mean, Kamlesh talked about a lot of governance stuff and a lot of the paperwork stuff, which is all great. But I think the best thing that they've done is cutting the cost for kids. Cuts one of the biggest barriers to entry within the game.
Right.
And you can see the difference it has had on representation.
That's very good. You mentioned the cutting the cost. Are there any other further reforms at Yorkshire Cricket Club you think should happen?
I think the one thing that is very clear, that it is at the minute, it's very much a Lord Patel reliant organisation. And I think my worry is, I can see he's pretty drained out. My worry is, as and when he actually leaves it, that it could go back to business as usual. And I think that's where the governing body and the game as a wide, we need to change attitudes, we need to change culture. That doesn't happen through paperwork.
Perhaps these very hearings are doing that. I'd like to move on to you, Jahid, now. When your story came out to light, the Essex Chief Executive, John Stevenson, said that he'd reached out to you to offer full support and hopes you feel encouraged and comfortable to be a part of the investigation. But your barrister then said that you tried entering into a dialogue with Essex County, but you didn't respond to the request, or they didn't respond to the request. What happened there?
The first time when I spoke out, John Stevenson just messaged me, left a message on my phone as well to say, sorry to hear what you went through, etc., etc. And since then, it just got brushed under the carpet, in my opinion, because I just haven't had nothing from Essex to check whether if I'm all right or not. Then obviously my lawyer, Amjad Khan, obviously I spoke to him about it. What's happening? So we've had interviews with the barristers over there for the investigation, and that was the only thing that I had from Essex there. Amjad approached Essex to have a meeting to talk about the things I've faced during my time at Essex, and they want to talk about all of that and have a meeting about it. And they had a bit of exchange with the emails, and then apparently they lost the email that we sent. And I find that very amazing, to be honest, because how do you lose an email? Apparently went to a junk email or something. I even check my emails all the time, and I do check junk email to make sure it's something I'm not missing out. So I don't know how on earth can you lose an email like that. Regardless if you did lose your email or not, all it takes to reply back again, just chase it up to say, well, we have emailed you, but we haven't no response from you guys. But all you have to do is just email again to just say, or make a phone call.
So they haven't reached out since, or Again,
it's us who's the one who's approaching them to get a meeting, to have a chat. And finally we did manage to get one. However, it hasn't gone...
It had to be you reaching out to them.
Yeah, it's always us, yes.
Did you follow the complaints procedure?
So, I was very young back then, so I didn't know what complaint process was, because I came into an environment where all of these slurs and racial things was just normal in that dressing room. I mean, I was just a small fish in that big characters of people there. But the only thing I did make, I did speak to some of the Asian guys who were there, who used to play cricket there. I used to approach them and ask them, things like they used to call me curry munchers, for example, and I wasn't sure what that meant, and I used to approach them and say, what does that mean? Why did they call us curry muncher? And the advice I got was just, ignore it, just concentrate on your game, and just, don't worry about that.
Which you did for a while, but then you did eventually come forward. What made you come forward at the end? Because you I think it was last year that you raised the concerns. And what held you back?
Well, that obviously because Azim came out and spoke about and gave his testimony, and just listened to his story. I felt like I had to come out and speak about it and support Azim, because it's not him alone in this. We all went through similar sort of things growing up playing cricket in a professional setup, and I felt I had to come out and speak about it and support that cause and his testimony that he spoke out.
Thank you. So I'm just going to re-ask the question I asked both George and Ramesh earlier about banter. And when I'm in a rehearsal room, when I was in another business, the banter in the rehearsal room would be quite extraordinary, and generally not offensive, and that's the way it works. And in a changing room, a sporting changing room, I know that banter goes backwards and forwards. When does banter become racism? How do we define this? How do we police it, if we do at all? I'll ask Azim that first.
Yeah, I mean, look, I hate the word. I think for me, one man's banter is another person's demise. And where does it cross it? And there's been lots of attempts to downplay what I actually went through. Just to put it into context, I was called a Paki, not just in the dressing room, in public places.
It gets brushed off as banter, which makes it...
Yeah, and in the end, as I reflect over the last 13 months and last 2 years, in the end, bar staff at places were calling me the P word, a Paki, right? So it's just not banter. It really isn't. And as I've said, I think banter is used as an excuse to make someone feel isolated.
Right. I see Jahid nodding away there. You agree?
Exactly the same way I feel, because I think they're using it as an excuse to make themselves popular in that dressing room by using those slurs and laugh about it. I got that a lot throughout my whole career when I was playing there. And every time they made any kind of sort of slurs or jokes about myself and was very personal about it, you could hear the other guys are laughing with them, which made me feel very, very obviously upset about so many things. Things like calling me, would you bomb the club, for example, in front of everyone.
Yeah,
but the people laughing about it, which made me feel like, is this...
And as George said, it's about isolating people, and
yeah,
that's what it does. Okay, look, thank you very much. I'll pass back to the chair. Thank you.
Clive Efford.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks for coming and giving evidence this morning. Azim, can I just ask you, you think that there's been an attempt from sections of the media to focus on you and make you the issue to avoid having to deal with the wider issue in cricket of racism?
Yeah, I think it feels very much like the cricket establishment needs to make this about me. And I think a lot of it was to stop other people coming forward. And it achieved that. There's been a lot written about me over the last 13 months. I've made mistakes in my life. One of the first things that came out a couple of days after Select Committee was anti-Semitic messages that I had made. And I did exactly what I asked everyone else to do, which is apologise, accept, and go, the journey bit, but, try and make some learnings as to why I made them comments.
When you say the establishment, what are you thinking when you say the establishment? Because I asked you about the media, Are you saying the cricketing establishment itself within the structures of cricket?
Yeah, I think it's a structural thing. I think the way it's set up is it's a job for the boys. It's a boys' network. You know, you've got a friend of a friend who wants to protect. You know, I talked about David Lloyd in here last year, and I walked out of this room and I received an apology. And I spoke to him on the phone. We talked about it, and I thought, you know, it would have been a great message because David then really wanted to make sure that he was part of the solution. And I felt Sky Cricket made probably as bad a decision as anyone has through this last 2 years where they got rid of him. And I think what that created is a lot of his friends and people. You've got influential people right at the top of the cricket establishment who are former players. And what I've found is that for them to feel like they don't get implicated is to attack me. And I've felt that throughout the last 13 months.
Yeah, and the way it's been reported, particularly by Yorkshire Post. I mean, I'm the MP for Eltham, where Stephen Lawrence was murdered, and I know how the media treated Eltham as a name and as a place, and they created an environment where where racists actually felt empowered. They thought, this is Eltham, this is where racists live, ignoring the fact that racism are everywhere and it's an issue that we have to deal with across a whole of society. So I have a sort of an understanding of this issue about what environment the Yorkshire Post creates with the way it writes about the story of race around Yorkshire Cricket Club. And so do you feel, and I think you've said it already, but I'll just tease it out to you a little bit more, do you feel that the way the words are used and the way it's reported is creating that environment in Yorkshire that means that you don't feel safe when you walk down the street?
Yeah, I think, you know, we talk about all these hotlines and whistleblowing, and, you know, a lot of organisations will talk about, you know, come forward, talk about it. But what environment have we created for the whistleblower? You know, I have felt like really not supported at all. You know, the last couple of months, and I want to thank the ECB on this, I've received 24/7 security from the ECB. But a lot of the times through the last 13 months, I've been attacked. And what that has created, arguably, the sort of hate towards me and my family locally, which has led me to leave. If I was to pick one reason why all this has happened, unfortunately, I'd have to say it was the Yorkshire Post's writing.
And you mentioned that the ECB are providing you with security, but do you think that they're doing enough to push back against elements like the Yorkshire Post and others?
The simple answer would be no. I think the providing of the security, you know, the security department, because at times it's felt like there's real risks, has been really good throughout. But, you know, there's no protection. At times, you know, I have felt that even the ECB has been involved in the leaking and the planting of some of the stories that have come out against me. You know, my medical information has been shared at different times. My data has been openly shared with a lot of people, and that for me is very alarming.
So just to follow up on that, since you appeared before this committee last year, you're saying that the ECB, from within the ECB, they've been involved in leaking stories to undermine you.
Yeah, and I've made that point to the new chair as well. I felt at different times there's any chance that there's been to try and discredit my experiences, bearing in mind my experiences like in that document that have been corroborated, substantiated over and over again. I felt like even the ECB has tried to do that.
Would you name anyone who's been involved in that?
No, because I think for me, as I said last year, I don't think it's about individuals. I think the structural problems within cricket are a lot bigger, and that's what needs to be looked at. If we go on to individuals, all that does is allows the conversation to go on to that as opposed to actually dealing with the real issues.
Thank you.
Kevin Brennan.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Ahmed, can I just ask you about the Catherine Newton investigation? What's your views about that? Do you have faith in that process?
It's taken longer than what they promised. When I reached out to find out when the reports would get released, I was told it was in September. And then it just kept going, we're going to finish by October. Now I've been told it's going to be finishing by December, end of December, possibly in the early New Year's. So it just keeps dragging on. But again, I don't know what the reasons are, why they're taking so long to get the report out there. Speaking with Catherine, I do think she's doing a good job. And I think she's doing a thorough investigation, and I think she is doing a good job. I feel like she's listened to what I've said and taken that quite seriously, obviously. And but I just don't know what Essex are doing to support that. Whether they're doing anything to help the investigation, I don't know. I'm assuming they are investigating and speaking to the ex-players or the previous guys who played cricket before, who's in that dressing room. I just don't know whether it's Essex helping with the investigation to speak to those ex-players to say, let's cooperate with these guys, make sure we get this out there. So I'm not sure whether they're doing that.
It's been over a year, hasn't it, I think, since
yes,
it was
been,
commissioned, the report. Have you had any, so we expect it soon, possibly, is what you're telling us, yeah? And have you had any assurances in relation to the report about whether it will be made public and available for everybody to see in a sort of transparent way? Because, as you know, a lot of the issues at Yorkshire came out of the club's reluctance to issue an independent, in inverted commas, report that had been commissioned into some of what Mr. Afiq has told us about in terms of racism at Yorkshire. Have you had any assurances in that regard?
No.
And do you know what do you expect to happen when the report is finalised?
I don't know what action they will take. I don't know, to be honest. If I'm being honest with you, I don't know what the action will take because there is a current player still playing who's abused me, who's racially slurred, does a lot of things to bully me throughout my whole career, and they're still going. And I don't know what action they will take against that person. It's not just a small person, it's a big fish. And I don't know what they will do regarding that.
You think the report should be published in full when it's finished?
And yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Jane Stevenson.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to talk about the ECB's progress since last year. Do you feel significant progress has been made? I was reading about the South Asian Action Plan and the African Caribbean Engagement Plan, things like that. Do you think there's been any progress or good progress?
I'll talk about that. Sorry. So I work with a charity called Platform Cricket. We provide basic coaching sessions during school time, and we help a lot of kids to engage in cricket and also move on to the club system, etc., etc. We approached ECB regarding, obviously, since the issues come up. We approached them. Unfortunately, we haven't had no success, no sort of support from them to support what we do in that charity. And again, they've spoken about these 12 points, and I just don't feel like ECB is doing anything about it so far. I don't know whether they're going to look into these issues that I've put out there with the ECB guys, but I just don't feel like they're showing any support at the moment, and it's still dragging on a long time. So and still haven't resolved a lot of the issues that we spoke about.
And
yeah, I mean, as I said earlier, I'd love to be able to sit here and say, this and this has happened, and this is where the changes will happen. Unfortunately, I feel like there's a lot of superficial things at the top. Like I said earlier, any PR activity that can bring a little bit of good PR is what's done, as opposed to, after I spoke last year, the first thing I would have done is gone to the recreational game to really understand and get to the grips of the issue. The ICEC report, I think, is going to be a pivotal moment for the game. I think at that point, the game's got a choice, and I hope that is seen as an opportunity. But three things straight away that I would have done is a clear reporting mechanism, which didn't work in my case and hasn't since. I've been contacted by several people since that have gone through the same type of problems. Jai spoke about earlier, it's the onus is always on the victim to keep pushing, and it's draining. Secondly, I think an education element, but that's not just do some questionnaires so we can say that 35% more people have done training this year. And I think the recruitment of leadership positions, but also throughout the game, I think how that is done is really important, because at the minute what I see is representation is important, really important, but that's not alone going to solve anything. You know, I've had some of my most incredible supporters come from white people within this last 2.5 years, you know, and it feels like to me, because as a South Asian, as a Muslim, I've spoken out, there's a real sort of PR drive to make it look like there's a lot being done for that community. And I think Amnesh talked about it earlier. I feel like there needs to be a real, genuine, heartfelt commitment to making cricket a place for everyone. And that comes for, you know, working class, state schools, and people from all sorts of background. And I don't think I've seen enough of that.
Thank you. Do you think the ECB has enough power to punish people when there's a case of discrimination? Or do you think, as has been suggested for football, it needs an independent sort of regulator overseeing these sort of issues? Jahid, can I come to you first?
I think they have got power. I think they do. But I feel there should be independent regulators to... because as a victim, so far I've had no support from ECB so far. I mean, it's great that we talk about cleaning up the mess and regarding the games and stuff, but as a victim, I just haven't had no support from it, and this is why I've believed there should be an independent.
Have you spoken to anyone from?
Yeah, I'm the one who's approached the ECB guys about the reports and everything.
You regularly?
Yeah, I have, and the person who was investigating the case, halfway through, he moved on from the case, which I haven't been told, and then I had to call up to find out what's happening with the case, and they goes, "Oh, sorry, but that person has left, so I'm in charge of that case now." I said, "Well, when were you going to tell me about it? I mean, I don't know what's going on. I'm asking about the report. You guys keep telling me it's going to happen, but you haven't." And it just, I'm the one who's keep pushing and pushing and pushing to get something out of them. But no one actually approached me directly to speak to me, to give some support. Or what can we do for you, Jahid, for example? Nothing been done.
Thank you. Azim, do you think an independent regulator?
I mean, I think it became very clear within my case in the first bit, but it has evidently become clear. I think they have a difficult situation where, at one sense, you're a promoter, where you need to make the game look in a good light, and then you're regulating some really tough, you know, things that doesn't make the game look good. You know, I think just doing the simple sort of, he's bowled a couple of beamers, or, you know, he's got the wrong size bat, is something they can deal with. But I think it's become evidently clear that issues of this stature is something that they need to, independent regulator need to be brought in for. Like I said, I feel like structurally, even if they want to actually deal with stuff, the structure doesn't allow them to, and it always comes across as the victims are pushing, and you know, there's always an excuse not to act as opposed to act.
Okay, thank you. And as a final follow-up, we briefly touched on the women's game at the end of the last panel. Do you know if there are similar incidents within the women's game, or I hope you're going to say no, we're much too civilised to...
I think obviously not being involved in that, it's difficult for me to comment. The one thing I would say, I've been contacted from people across the game over the last 13 months. You know, this year I got contacted by a coach at a county club whose director of cricket was mocking Ramadan by holding his beer up to him. And I've had some contact from the women's game, from parents actually, more around how some of the girls are being treated. But it's not something that I am as informed of. So I wouldn't want to say that it's exactly the same, but yeah, I've had some communication around it.
Thank you. And funny, I met with some Jewish groups yesterday, actually, who were quite full of admiration for the way you did address the issues that came up around anti-Semitism, and you continue to be in contact with them. Who's the best placed sort of body to deliver sort of education when things go wrong? Because you like to feel people need the chance to correct things and educate themselves.
Yeah, absolutely, and like I can't thank the Jewish community enough. They've brought me in, they've shown me a lot of love, and the one thing out of a bad situation is I've made friends for life, and I'm really thankful to them. I think I've been fortunate. I've had communication with a lot across the board. Some people have publicised it, a lot haven't. March of the Living took me to Auschwitz, and it was the most harrowing experience, but an experience of education that I feel like everyone should experience. And I would say that I would encourage anyone, this is not a plug for them, I would encourage anyone to get in touch with them and go on their trips to learn more about Jewish people.
Thank you. Jahid, who do you feel should be educating people in this sort of area, and where should it start? At sort of local club level or in schools? Or
I believe it should come from the school system. I work in schools myself, so this is where it needs to be taught from the start, from there. And obviously that moves on to the county. Because when I was playing cricket, we never got any sort of training talking about all of these before, to be honest. Never been mentioned about anything. It just turned up and played cricket. That was the only thing we did. I wish there was a system back then where everyone should be educated into everyone's cultures, religion, wherever it was, to be taught. And what can be said, what can't be said. It is a very sensitive sort of area, and it should have been taught there. Unfortunately, that wasn't there. Which is a shame, really, because I would have thought PCA would have looked into that back in the days, NECB, to educate people about that.
Can I just add a caveat to that a little bit? There's, as I said, because I spoke out as a South Asian and Muslim, there's a lot of organisations, and this is a space I've spoken to Sport England about, that do a lot of this education work. And I feel like the funding element of that takes over and ends up then becoming part of the system. There was a situation earlier on in the summer where we read stories about Crawley Town and how the manager there had, discriminated against people and called Muslim players terrorists and stuff like that. But a lot of these organisations don't feel empowered or don't have the courage to condemn that type of stuff because they're funded by the system. And I don't know whether something, again, I've spoken to Kick It Out, is where actually which are the good ones that need to be brought in, because a lot of them, unfortunately, from my experience, are doing more damage than good.
Okay, I could probe, but I know we're pressed for time, but thank you. Thank you, Chair.
John Nicholson.
Thank you very much, and thank you for coming back, Azim. Along with fellow members, I asked you questions last year, and I found it very affecting, and I know people who watched did as well. Could I go back briefly to an answer you gave earlier, where you talked about David Lloyd, former cricketer, and I've just been Googling what happened after your evidence. He lost his job, didn't he, at Sky? You told us about racist comments he'd made. He then contacted you and apologised, is that correct?
Yes.
But then he lost his job. And you think it's a mistake for Sky to have sacked him. Can you explain why?
Yeah, he made some comments. He rang me straight away as soon as I get out of here. He sent me a message. We had a good chat. And I really felt that he could be really an influential part with his profile and, and how loved he is. He could play a big part in actually us moving the conversation on to a positive. I compare it to the way the Jewish community did with me.
So he could say, I'm sorry, I've learned, and encourage other people to say sorry and to learn. But by sacking him, what's happened is that Sky presumably has discouraged other people from saying sorry because they don't want to get the sack themselves.
And that's exactly my point. You know, the person who apologised lost his job. That's not going to encourage anyone else to come forward and accept that they've got things wrong. And, you know, we've got to get this conversation to a place where people are allowed to, you know, we've got to take the fear out of these conversations as well. You know, this is where leaders come in and braveness. It's not just a one-way stream. You know, and it's something I want to talk about more openly down the line, is like the uncomfortable conversations both ways. And I just felt at the time, if they'd have stuck with him, I just felt possibly 13 months on today, the conversation could have been a little bit better.
Are you sorry you named him?
To be honest, when I spoke last year, I just came in and I just wanted to speak from the heart, and whatever I got asked, I answered. And I think from that point of view, I'm not sorry about anything I've done, you know.
You talked last year when I asked you about the impact on your family, and that was very moving and very disturbing. A year on, and you've given us some really deeply disturbing evidence today, including saying, and I saw the faces of my fellow committee members, you said somebody had come and defecated in your garden. I mean, beyond disgusting. What's the last year been like for your family?
Yeah, challenging, really difficult. I think everyone saw I'm quite an emotional person, and the one thing I wanted to do is come here and not be as emotional. But the last year, you know, I spoke out, but the impact on my mum and dad, my wife, kids, it's just been, you know, that's the only thing that's changed. I've left the country. I don't really want to go into too much of the details of it, but, you know, there was a point in the summer because of the constant pressure. You know, at times we were getting hounded 6 to 7 times a week by the press. You know, stories, same allegations, ever-changing details. One day I was batting, one day I was fielding. You know, and it had a huge impact on everyone. And, you know, like I said, moving abroad is not an easy thing, especially when you've got ill parents, and it's difficult.
You've been very critical and blunt about the Yorkshire Post today. If the editor of the Yorkshire Post was here, what would you say to him?
I mean, I had one conversation with the editor of the Yorkshire Post before I came to the committee, and I offered to give him and show him all the proof of what I was saying, and I was never contacted again. You know, like I said, I'm a hopeful. I would like to have a conversation and hopefully get them to understand the effect of what they've written and the effect of that in society. And that's really it. Look, I think I've said pretty clearly, I think it's had a huge impact on mine and my family's life. It's driven us out of the country. But as I was with the Jewish community, as the Jewish community was with me, I would be incredibly willing to sit down, have a conversation, and hopefully help them be part of the journey.
Thank you. That concludes our questions this morning, well, this afternoon now. Can I thank Jahid Ahmed for appearing with us today, and Azim Rafiq. Have a safe journey back, and I bring this meeting to a close. Order. Thank you.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.